quite a big question as to why I rode across the Atlantic, really. I had quite a huge burnout in 2023 after quite a busy few years of being in different industries, from professional sports to running a chalet out in the French Alps and whitewater raft guiding and super yachting. All of those things were kind of 180s in their own right in my life. And then when I had my burnout in 2023, I really had to delabel myself and take away the labels that I'd put on myself, but also other people had put on me. And so I needed to go deep, but deeper into not only the physical aspect, but the mental and the emotional aspect too, and understand what it takes to have high performance, especially when you are going through these sort of transitions in life. Because a lot of the time when we go through change and transitions, it can be really destabilizing and paralyzing as well. And so, yeah, I went and did a 10-day silent meditation retreat, which wasn't really a retreat. It was definitely an intense period of looking at the sort of your whole life, really, and how your body stores that. And then I went and did a somatic training course out in Marrakesh, and then sat in my room for a while and kind of didn't know how to put that into sort of forward motion. Like, how was I going to make a business out of this, and how was I going to almost contribute to society? And then I came back to an idea that I had in 2022 when I was at Antigua, where I wanted to go row across the Atlantic, and I had a strong enough why at this point to go and do something like that. So yeah, I went and put a sort of vision board together, and then January 1st I decided to say it, and it took me a little while to sort of communicate with a few people who had either been in that type of world or were coaches and various other people who'd had that experience of rowing across the Atlantic or Pacific or even Indian Ocean. And I thought, well, I'm going to be able to do it. I just need to find the funds. And at that point as well, like, I had hardly any savings left, so I was kind of at the bottom of everything. I think when you find yourself in the pits of just the abyss, should I say, you kind of have two choices. You either sit in it and you've got nothing in your life, or you actually make something. And that contribution to society was a big part for me. And so, yeah, I built a team together, and I knew I had a lot of training to do. I had a lot of funds to raise. That's not including the actual charity funds as well, because I did it for 4 different charities for various reasons. And yeah, I knew that I wanted to do it within a year, or get the project to the start line within a year. And so it took me 11 months to go from idea and getting that initial sort of funding all the way to the start line. And it wasn't just me, it was a lot of people who believed in the mission. And I think that's, again, why you do these certain projects, is because it's about not only understanding your internal processes, but the external systems, the external support that you have. And I built that, and I wanted to understand that community aspect. And so, yeah, got it to the start line, and we started in Gran Canaria. I pushed off, and 54 days later I landed in Barbados. When I, lost my sense of purpose and belonging after I had finished my professional cycling career, I really struggled with what to do with my life. And then I kept hitting these really low lows and finding myself in this sort of paralysis where I didn't know which way to go, and that came from a sense of fear. And I think the only way you can get past fear is in a way, look within yourself, but also look at this sense of awe. In these environments, especially in the extreme environments that I find myself in, there's both that fear aspect and that sense of awe. And for me, that's the anchor to sort of step into those liminal spaces. You know, when we look at a sense of change or a cycle of change, and everyone goes through these cycles of changes, whether it's big or whether it's really small, we look at it from like in three stages. The separation stage, which takes courage to separate yourself from who you once were and who you know you want to be. And then when you go into this liminal space, there is no structure, there is no society, and the patterns that you once knew don't serve you. And that can be really scary, and that takes fortitude. And then when you eventually sort of get to the end, there's this reintegration phase of all the things that you've learned in those moments, and how do you reintegrate what you've learned out there into society, back into structure, and have this new baseline, this new foundation of who you are. It's really difficult, and I think that reintegration phase is underlooked a lot of the time, but also that liminal space, a lot of people find it hard to step into. My way of opening the door every morning when I was rowing across the Atlantic was this sense of awe, and that would be my foundation to every day get out the door and have that grounding moment, which would set me then for the rest of the day. So every morning you would wake up, and you know the sound is constant out there. You know, you've got this tiny thin piece of fiberglass that's separating you and 5 kilometers of ocean beneath you, and it sounds like bullets and bombs going off, and it sounds a lot worse than what it sometimes actually is. But you would wake up, and I'd wake up, and you know this tiredness and just sleep deprivation was unreal. But I'd wake up and I'd just get into a rhythm of taking my first breath and going, right, no matter what's going to happen, just get out the door. So I'd get dressed into my wet clothes, I'd put 3 baby wipes up my sleeve, and I'd open the door, clip myself on, shut the door, and I would get my bucket, and you know, there's a bucket and chuck it situation. and I'd sit on the bucket, and it would be pitch black, and I would look at this, like at the stars and the moonlit horizon, and I'd have that sense of awe, and I'd look up, and just that curiosity for what's out there, and you know, in space, and the vastness of this ocean, and I'm this tiny little dot. And for me, there's two sections, this perceptual vastness of what I can see, wonder, awe, and then this conceptual vastness, you know, what is it going to teach me? And then when you sort of combobulate them into this sort of need for accommodation as to how are you going to put the things that you've learned into your life when you get to land. And so for me, that was a big thing every day, was to just have that moment to appreciate, you know, where I'm at, even though it can be really scary at times, and even though, you know, I'm missing my family, and you know, sitting on a bucket is deeply uncomfortable, whereas, you know, sitting on a toilet at home is also just like, you can get these moments where switching on a kettle, sitting on a toilet, you take for granted, but actually once you've gone through that process again, it's appreciating what you have in life. And yeah, it was the small moments that really made me feel that. So when I would start, I'd try and start around about 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I would do 3 hours on, 1 hour off. But a lot of the time it would start to change. I had my standards and routine that I would try and stick to, but because the weather patterns and the systems that were coming through were quite strong a lot of the time, I did have to adapt to that. But yeah, I mean, most of the time it would be, you know, you get up, you do your 3 hours of rowing, and you have your leftovers from your snack pack from maybe the night before. A chocolate bar wouldn't go amiss at the start, and then yeah, I'd come back in around about 8 o'clock and make my breakfast and have a moment to just get myself together. And then again, it would be after breakfast, straight back onto the oars. And you'd also have like house maintenance throughout the day. And obviously it was a little bit chilly in the mornings, and then during the day it was piping hot. But yeah, some days I'd be rowing and then you'd have this huge squall come through, which is like a big system of rain and lots of wind, and you could see them coming from the distance, and it would throw you off course a lot of the time. But you know, everything for me was about marginal gains. Where can I gain that extra bit of speed, or where can I gain, you know, that extra bit of sleep or rest? And I was really curious as how I could do that a lot of the time. And my coach, Duncan Roy from the Ocean Rowing Academy, really sort of set me up to succeed in that area. You know, we look at different variations of, you know, do I need my dagger board in, or, you know, do I need to move weight around the boat? So there was a lot to constantly think about during the day, that there wasn't a lot of time to reflect on, you know, what had happened in my life. The first bit was I was actually walking down the lane with my sister. I have an identical twin sister who is just my life, and I could feel her emotion the most. And one of the things she asked me when we were walking down, it was pitch black at night and the stars were out, and you know, I said, Georgia, look at the sky, like this is what I'm going to see out here. And she said, what do you fear the most? And I said, I fear the most is that I don't know if I'm going to find who I know I am, and I'm scared to face some of the things that I know I need to face out there alone, but I need to do it. And that's where it all kind of started, this kind of emotional roller coaster of stuff. 10 hours into my row, I hit huge wind and huge waves between Tenerife and Gran Canaria, which I was expecting anyway. And you know, as I was sort of heading out into this wind funnel, I had this feeling that something wasn't quite right. There was this, it's sort of tapping into that intuitive piece where, you know, your body's scanning for all these elements, then it's telling you, Annasley, you need to change something. And I fought against that. There was this resistance to change anything, this kind of ego mindset where I was just like, no, I've got this, but I know that there's something that's going to happen if I don't change it now. And then the next minute I looked to my left shoulder and there was 2 sets of waves, and I knew the first one was going to break just underneath me, but the second one I was going to find myself in the trough, and it was going to break and it was going to roll me. And so I let go of my oars, and I remember just taking a moment to realise that I was going in and I couldn't stop it. And then it hit me, it threw me straight into the water. And in that process, I had a moment of silence and stillness. When I was under the water, it was just this pure sense of calm. And the only way I can describe it is being back in my mother's womb. And then I opened my eyes and I could see like the greyness of my deck, and I looked up and I was like, the first sort of thing was I can open my eyes underwater. And then I was attached by a lifeline on my boat, and so this was like the umbilical cord of a baby. It was like, that was my lifeline, and so I pulled on it, and as I pulled on it I got to the surface of the water and was just reminded of this huge battlefield that I was in. And the sound was just, I can hear it now and I can see it all now, and it was almost this slow motion, but everything just sort of clicked in to play. And I've never gone through a capsize in my life, I hadn't trained for it, but you know, I had to let go of the boat, I had to allow it to rewrite itself, and I got back on the boat and alarms were going off, kit was everywhere, but I just went into this automatic process of, I knew what I needed to do. And so yeah, I put my para anchor out, which is like a big parachute that sort of slows you down almost to either a complete stop or slow you down to a point where you're not really going anywhere, and gives you that stability too. And I knew I needed to go through that, and again I practiced it, but in those conditions you kind of don't expect to be able to throw yourself into that situation straight away, you know, 10 hours into a row. Anyway, threw that out, and that gave me enough time to then sort of communicate with my team and explain what had happened. You know, I was okay. I was still able to carry on, and I had two choices because I could still see land at that point. And I had two choices: do I call for help and call it, or do I go and know that this was going to be the tone for the rest of the journey? And I knew that the ocean knew I needed to go through that process, and I knew I needed to go through that too. And I just had to leave. I just had to go. And so yeah, I set off at 2 o'clock in the morning. I pulled my para anchor back in, and I just rode and rode and rode. And you know, for the next 3 days, I just a complete blank. But when I came out of the sort of seasickness and the sort of chaos of it all, I had this moment of pure stillness, and I felt like I could breathe. And you know, my team again were just amazing through that whole process, and in holding me and holding me accountable as well. You know, my mind was so focused on this, chasing this world record, and you know, we didn't make it too public, but you know, in a way, I knew that my mindset was really competitive. And you know, as a professional athlete, that's what you're trained to do. You're trained to chase these end goals. And for the next 3 weeks, I was just fighting and fighting and fighting. And my coach we had a call one day, and he was just like, he gave me some home truths, and I needed that. And it hit me to a point where I was just like, I am privileged to be out here. And it doesn't matter about the world record. Everything else is out of my control. The only thing that's in my control is my internal systems and how I respond, not react, but respond to things. I had this beautiful bird that I just remember followed me from the very moment I remember being out there all the way to the very end. And it would come in the morning, and just as the sun would rise, and you would see it darting around, and then it would come at night time. And you know, sometimes it would come during the day, but that was almost my rhythm. I would say good morning, Michael, and good evening, Michael. And the reason why this bird was called Michael was because there was a fantastic human called Michael Holt who had my boat prior to me owning it, and he was doing the same route as me. And unfortunately, he died on my boat, which is called True Blue, and he died 700 miles out at sea. And so that him and the boat were recovered, and I did the boat up in my field, and you know, did lots of alterations. And I decided from that point onwards, when I was going to take that boat on, that it was going to be me and Michael doing that journey together. And you know, we would get True Blue to the other side in Barbados, where he was hoping to land, and we'd do it together. And so this bird was Michael for me, was, you know, this reminder that, you know, I'm privileged to be out here, and if Michael could have seen, you know, what we were doing together, he would be so happy and so proud. Oh my God, wow. Oh, that moment was amazing. I could smell it before I could see it, and the only way I can describe it is it smells like Marmite and burnt toast. And I remember getting up from the deck and looking over the bow, and I couldn't see it. I was like, where is Barbados? Like, I should be right in front of me. And all I had to do was just like look a little bit left, and it was just kind of there in the distance. And so yeah, I was nervous because, you know, you've got 54 days out at sea seeing nothing, and then you know you're coming to a piece of landmass, and you've got loads of obstacles to sort of navigate through. You know, I had a fantastic human who was local to Barbados, who was going to help me just sort of navigate the reef system to get into St. Charles. And yeah, he said to me honestly, look, it's the waves are breaking, it's massive out here, you know, brace yourself for a possible tow. And I really didn't want that, because that would then become an assisted row. So I was really nervous. 10 miles to go, I could sort of start to see the waves breaking, but I was like, this isn't that bad. Like, this is not bad at all. And then yeah, my weather router told me, look, Annasley, you've got to be, you know, half a mile from Barbados, but not too far out, because there's a really strong northern current that's coming from the west side of Barbados, and if you go into that, you won't be able to come back in. And so there was 3 reef systems as well that I needed to avoid, and I got to my first waypoint of just navigating around the island, and as I hit that, I could see this absolutely massive squall in the distance, and it hit me so fast. And at that point I was like, well, that's me over and done with. Like, I knew that I had to keep my dagger board in, which is the center board, to sort of keep me on track, but there was a huge possibility for a capsize. So I just had to sort of surrender to it all and make the best out of a bad situation. And then the boat that Dustin and my sister were on to sort of help me navigate through the last 6 miles, they filmed it, and when I look at it now, it looks really like flat. It felt like everything was just suddenly helping me. And I have these things with rainbows. Every time I see a rainbow, that's a good omen for me. That something is just there to help me, and that for me is Michael in that process. And yeah, I rode for another 3 hours, which I wasn't expecting. I thought, it was just going to be around the corner, but it wasn't. And then when I arrived, I had loads of people there that I, again, wasn't expecting, and the sort of the community that came around and helped me and were just so enthusiastic and followed my journey was amazing. And there was a very special girl called Eve, and I'd heard about her and her family. There's a little boy called Xander as well, who's her brother. And yeah, I was really excited to meet them, because the bracelet that I'd worn, I wanted to give to her and show her that, when she wears that bracelet, if she has any sort of struggle or needs a bit of strength, then she can look down at her wrist and know that it's been across the Atlantic, and she can do the same if she ever wanted to. So yeah. My next expedition is going to be, it's not going to be bigger than the Row, it's just a different type of expedition. But I think for me, I've kind of gone to the depths of what I needed to understand personally. But now I'm really curious as to looking at this sort of human capacity aspect and how I can help other people navigate those uncertain, unknown spaces. And so yeah, this next expedition is going to explore that over the next 2 years. And my charity is the Clock Tower Foundation, and the Clock Tower Foundation is a military charity, and I really want to be able to support not just the families and the sort of serving personnel, but also the veterans as well, and how they navigate uncertainty in their lives, from going from military life to civilian life, the educational aspect and the physical, mental and emotional aspect. Funding for that is imperative, and from personal experience with coming from a military family, I understand just how important it is to have the respite that you need with family, and also that the support that they need when transitioning out of military life. And so yeah, I think that can also be implemented in civilian life as well, educational purposes, transitioning from education life to the big wide world. So we're always going through these micro and macro transitions. It's just how we deal with them, and that's my biggest passion now, is to look at this feral intelligence, and how do we tap into those moments of intuition and visualization and the somatic processes, and using it for the greater good. But yeah, this next expedition will take me out to Antarctica, and I'm really excited to find a new space and learn something new. I've never done it before, and I've got a fantastic team of people who are world experts in this field, and I'm really privileged to have their guidance and their support, and believe in me that I can achieve something like this. It's a big ask, and there's a lot to do, but I'm really, really excited for this next challenge. Yeah, sometimes I have to ask myself about, whether is something that Are the things that I do because I lack that self-belief? Yes. Yeah, I think I do have a huge amount of imposter thinking rather than imposter syndrome. This imposter thinking is more of the sort of internal processes rather than, you know, constantly looking at that validation of the external. So yeah, I'm constantly having to check in with myself about, you know, what do I believe in myself? And my biggest anchor really is the value of fortitude and what that means. You know, I really have to look at the modern philosophies of Stoicism, and Harry Moffat is a particular person that sort of looks at this space, as well as various other authors that I'm sort of currently reading. But yeah, I think a sense of purpose isn't attached to what you do. It's your values and your principles. And a lot of people don't really understand what values are and principles, and you know, that's okay. But for me, I had to go into a few deep holes to really come to that core understanding of what my value is. And I think really most people only have one particular value that they live by. And, you know, for me, that is that fortitude piece. And it's not just courage, because courage is like striking a match and it goes out. And it's not just resilience, because resilience, I feel, is the end result. That fortitude piece is that sort of endurance piece that, again, we can't put time on, we can't put structure, we can't put society in that. You know, you come into this world alone, you go out alone, but how do we navigate that and be our own gurus rather than trying to constantly look for validation, constantly blame others rather than ourselves, and actually give that space for ourselves. I look at the solitude, magnitude and attitude of any sort of endeavour, whether it's a small challenge for the day or whether it's a big project that you've got in a few years' time. You know, the solitude piece really gives you that introspection and reflection, and tests that intuitive piece. The magnitude, if you look at the scale of things, you know, we're always looking for that end result, but how do we sort of change our process and going, well, that's the goal I want to achieve, but say if I can achieve more. And so that's where the marginal gains really comes into play. And the attitude piece is allowing awe to overshadow fear. You need fear, but awe is such a foundation to almost challenge what that fear looks like for you. So yeah, I suppose when you start to have that curiosity to understand those aspects, you can really achieve anything. And yeah, I'm really excited for what you guys have to achieve in your next in your project.
I've got to say, this interview, aside from being probably the best interview that I've ever recorded, credit to you there, is like a real visceral feeling of what it actually might be like out there. You know, Christian's on the boat all the time. I've been sort of project managing, and we come together to film the things, but there's a sort of the tangibility that hasn't arisen yet for exactly what that experience is going to be like. And I've been getting quite emotional listening to just, you know, the way that you've articulated like what this might be. Yeah. So I'm just super excited. Yeah,
I honestly, I think the fact that you guys have got to understand the boat from scratch, like I said, we were talking about earlier, you know, knowing the history behind it, but also understanding every part of your boat, that for me was integral. And that's what you guys are doing. You know, not only are you guys going to have to be sailors, but you're going to have to be, you know, plumbers, electricians, you know, mental health advocates for each other, you know, weather routers. You've got so many caps to have that it's important to understand, you know, that vessel that you're on is also metaphor for your own vessel. If you don't look after your boat, if you don't understand your boat, then it's not going to carry you to the other side. And I think this process that every single one of you goes through on the boat, you're going to make memories for life, and you're going to have that new foundation, that new baseline once you reach land at the other side. And I think one of the biggest things that I would have to say to you guys is don't rush that process of reintegration either, and have that support network after, because you're going to have gone through so much that you're going to more than likely have this big lull at the end. And it's about keeping yourself busy, but also being able to give that space to process what you've just gone through, because it's going to be a massive challenge for you to go through. Not only have you got to get the funds, you're also building the boat, you're also learning a new environment, and then you're stepping into that liminal space. So in a way, yeah, it's don't expect to move back into society quickly, and yeah, in a way, just don't have expectations. Allow things to come up and come through. I mean, the Greater Man Challenge is going to be imperative to change the way that men approach mental health. I think having a community of men that, you know, you can't run away from the situation that they find themselves in once they get out into the ocean. You know, you can't just step off the boat and go, nah, this isn't for me. Like, you have to move through that together. And I think the fact that you're in these elements and these situations where it is extreme, and it's going to reveal who you are if you react to it rather than respond to it. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, I've had men in my life who have been incredible mentors. I'm constantly talking to young people about surround yourself with mentors and people that inspire you, but also you'd like to live by their value or standards. And for me, I had my dad in that. You know, he was military, and for me, he set this tone that, you know, when he walked out the door and was going on a tour or you know, serving his country, I didn't know whether he was going to come back through that door. But when he came back through the door, I knew that he wasn't the same person that walked out the door. And that in a way allowed me to understand this sort of safety, security and risk aspect. For me, safety is an illusion, and I knew that I could never guarantee his safety out there. But the men that had his back, his brothers, were always going to have that safety element of how can we hold our brothers in arms. And the security part is, you know, if we're constantly looking for security, we're missing out on opportunity. And the way that a lot of the guys that I've been surrounded by have this adaptable mindset, and you know, there's a risk of security, but they're using that to the best of their ability and actually looking for the opportunities. And the risk element, if managed well, if you manage risk well, it's actually really sort of unleashing that unlimited potential that you have. And so many people are looking for an A plan or a B plan, but they don't allow the sort of current moment to unleash maybe a plan that just comes from within. And I think this is why the Greater Man Challenge is going to be so imperative, is because there'll be times where you can't plan for it, you just have to move with it. And I think it's going to be a really important process for the guys to take away after and go, we don't always need a plan, because plans feel like we have control, but when you're out there, you know you don't have control. The only control you have is who you are as a person and what your values are. And I think it will just bring you guys together in ways that you just can't explain. And again, the ocean is like an unspeakable world. You don't need to put it into a language. And for so much of our lives, we try and formulate a language for people to understand. But the best part is that you don't need to formulate a language for this experience. It needs to be felt and it needs to be experienced rather than trying to explain it. So yeah, I'm really excited for, you know, you guys to go through that and hear your reflections after.
When we get the boat back on the water, do you fancy coming for a sail?
I'd love to come for a sail, absolutely. I'd love to see how she feels and, you know, how she reacts to the wind, and, you know, just watching you guys operate and hear the stories and and feel her energy. You know, a lot of people think it's very spiritual, but you know, the spiritual aspect will definitely come through out there. Whether you believe in something or not, there's always going to be this higher power. And energy, you know, we all have emotion. Emotion is energy in motion, right? And it's constant. We can't run away from it. It's both the conscious and subconscious. And you find yourself in a paradigm that, again, you can't put into words, but both the boat and you guys have this energy that will come together and work well if you don't fight it. This is the bit that I'm really bad at. Currently, not currently, have done. Start again. Oh God, this is not what I'm good at. Let's go again. And don't know what I'm saying right now. I don't know how to follow that through right now. I'm just gonna say I'm an adventurer, speaker, philanthropist, who is supporting the Greater Man Challenge. This is the bit that I need to get better at. Hey, my name is Annasley Park. I'm an adventurer and I have rowed across the Atlantic around about 10 months ago. I'm also a speaker and also a philanthropist, and I'm here to support the Greater Man Challenge in the men's mental health. You can tap subscribe, you can just do that kind of stuff. Stuff, you know it. Just move the body. Right, shake it out. My thing is just
It's great.
I rowed across the Atlantic. Can you what would you say? Give me an example.
What would I say?
Yeah. No, yeah, come on.
Hi, I'm not Annasley Park. I didn't row across the Atlantic. I'm not a philanthropist, and I'm here because I'm part of the Greater Man Challenge. We are working to debunk the stigma surrounding men talking about their feelings in the mental health space. Like, follow, subscribe, hit that button.
Yeah.
Boom.
He's nailed it. Hey, my name is Annasley Park. I recently rowed across the Atlantic. I'm also a philanthropist and a speaker, and I'm here today to talk about men's mental health and also support the Greater Man Challenge. So if you want to follow, you can follow it here and subscribe and like and all the stuff.
Yeah! Winning!
Nice.